Hey, pilot, welcome back to Ready for Pushback. I'm Nick Fialka. Today is a conversation with a lady named Ralyn Wheeler, who is a big-time recruiter in the Part 135 world. She does a lot of charter recruiting for pilots, and we dive deep about pluses and minuses and things you can do to stand out and how to successfully craft a winning resume and lots of other things. So if you are a pilot looking for a job, wanting to sharpen your knife, this is your episode. All right. So sit back, relax. Let's get ready for Pushback.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
All right, Ralyn Wheeler, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Great. It's so nice to finally meet you.
I know somebody introduced us on LinkedIn, and yes. I forgot absolutely who it is, but I'm glad they did. This is so fun.
Me too. And I always tell people LinkedIn is a great way to connect. It's not the only way, but it is definitely a great way to network.
It is. You know, you're right. And you are relatively prolific on LinkedIn. You do a lot. And I want to get into that, but I want you to kind of set the stage, like tell the pilot that's listening who you are and what you do and why you're awesome.
Great. Thank you. Well, again, Ralyn Wheeler, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have been working in aviation for about 15 years. I was an estate manager for a very high net worth family, and the gentleman decided to buy a Gulfstream 200 and asked me if I could be the chief pilot, the DO, run the whole company. And we had to sit him down and tell him that, no, I was not a 119. So that wasn't going to happen. So I did end up running everything else from there, and have had many decades of experience in recruiting. And so had to learn pilot recruiting and was had no idea how to decipher a pilot resume 15 years ago, but I think I'm okay at it now. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you start looking at resumes and chewing on who a person is as a pilot, what are some things that you think stand out in a resume that make people interesting? Like, oh, this is a person I might be interested in calling.
Well, quite honestly, in 135, my first metric is the time. And so that's the first thing I look for. Finding that easily on the paper is really big to me. If I have to hunt and peck for it, I even had a resume the other day where the time was on the second page. And so if I've got to hunt and peck for the times, that is probably my number one yellow flag. Because I care so much, I typically do go ahead and try to find it and review the resume. I don't toss it aside. But that is a difficult thing. The other thing is, and when I started out and when I've tried to train other recruiters, pilots talk a lot in acronyms. In fact, I talk so much in acronyms that I usually can't tell you what they stand for. So I'm also the DER for Bel Air, and I'm also the AOSC. But if you ask me quickly what those two things mean, I probably can't regurgitate it very quickly. So we all talk in acronyms in aviation, and you want to sort of tone that down just a little bit, because a lot of companies are hiring sourcers who are reviewing resumes and then passing them on to a more experienced recruiter. And you want them to be able to find the information that they have been told to look for a little more easily.
Yeah, I completely agree. In my mind, a resume, first off, when somebody, I review so many resumes, and I'm happy to do it. And it's one of my favorite things, because I get to learn a little bit about who each person is, and everybody's got cool, different experience. But when somebody hands me a stack of papers and say, hey, will you review my resume? And it's a 2-pager or a 3 or 4 or 5-pager, I will tear off the other pages and crumple them up and hand them back and say, does this tell me everything I need to know? And they say, no. I said, well, then you need to tell me everything you know about yourself, and let this 1-pager speak for you, because that's it. How do you spend 20 minutes each on each resume, looking at it and examining every single line? How long do you think you spend on a resume?
Well, I have timed myself because the studies do show that recruiters in most industries do spend about 6 to 7 seconds looking at a resume. So I was curious about that and if it was actually true. So I probably spend more like 10 to 12
Mm.
seconds on a resume just to get the initial information I need. But if I have 100 resumes to review, quite honestly, it really could be more like 4 or 5 seconds to zero in and find the total time first and then move on. So the total time is not negotiable for us, obviously, in 135.
Right. And so for those pilots that are listening, wondering like, why is this time non-negotiable, is basically because of insurance requirements, right?
It is, but it is also because of our vetted vendors. So as a charter operator, we are vetted by Wyvern, Argus, two different, obviously, vetting companies. And so recently I hired a pilot who had 1160, but he had our type rating and he had really good multi-engine time. So I took a chance and I put him in the system and he was flagged by Argus. So we can, on the insurance, they're going to get the hours in the first rotation or two. So that's typically fine. The Argus, though, they flagged him for his first few rotations until he could get those hours. So it is hard and fast. And so if Argus flags, then that pilot can't fly a mission that's Argus rated.
I
So
see.
if you have 10 flights in the next, 5 days and 3 of them are Argus rated, that particular plane that we've put that mission on, that plane can't fly that mission if Argus says no.
I see. Okay. Well, that's really good information. I have never lived my life in the 135 world. So that is very interesting. I'm sure every other 135 pilot's like rolling their eyes like this is simple stuff, but that is really
Well,
interesting.
no, you'd be surprised, and more low time. You'd be surprised how many pilots don't really understand all the vetting that goes behind. And then we also do fly missions for other well notable 135 operators, and they also have vetting amounts on us. And so if we submit the packet for the pilots that will be on the plane, and one of those pilots doesn't meet their requirements, again, it's a trip we may have to, if we can't get another plane to that location to take that trip, which is expensive, we may lose that trip. So and so I had a pilot apply just this week, was going back and forth with me. I have 1100, and I'm like, you don't understand. That's 100 hours of trips that I could potentially lose if I made this decision. So, and also I know my insurance agent really well. I'd probably piss him off too. So there's that.
Well,
I don't know if he listens to these.
hopefully he does. Tell him to start listening. Give me a call. We'll
Yes.
do one about airplane insurance.
Yes, he's awesome.
That's cool. I think that is very interesting. I would hearken to guess that we're in 2025, that from 2022 to like almost 3/4 of the way through 2024, it was probably pretty difficult to have a big stack of resumes of people with more than 2,000 hours. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, and also because a lot of times, a lot of the low time pilots, by the time they get to 1500, they want to go to 121. So that's where they're aiming, and that's where they're focusing their energy. And then a lot of pilots, by the time they get to 2000, perhaps another operator has been able to make them a captain, and they don't meet our captain requirements. So it between really, quite honestly, between 1600 and maybe 2100, it's a little hard to capture them. They're ready to go on to the next step. They're ready to go to 121, and so what we have to offer may not be quite what they're looking for.
Where do you find your sweet spot then?
Well, right now it changes. And right now, because obviously the market is in my favor, it's in
Yeah.
the employer's favor at the moment, which is a nice, comfortable spot to be in. I don't like it for the pilots, of course. It's a little conflicting for me as a recruiter. It's great as someone who tries to mentor low time pilots. I hate it, but probably anywhere from 1,300 to probably 1,600. By about 1,700, a pilot has probably decided whether they're going to go 121 or stay with us in 135.
What are the things that make a person appreciate the 135 world?
The variety of flying. I have had a few pilots leave and call me 6 months later and say, "You were right. I don't like this." So, and I don't speak much about 121. I don't have much knowledge of it, but I do know that 135 pilots will say, I don't get to fly to different locations. I'm not landing in Aspen. I'm not landing in Jackson Hole. My schedule is pretty much the same. I talked to a 20-year pilot one time who had flown for 10 years, had flown Los Angeles to Australia and back for 10 years. And I've flown that route one time. That was enough. That was good. So it is the lack of variety, the lack of schedule. Our pilots are all 8-6 or 15-13. And so you're scheduled out for the year. If your mother invites you to an event, your spouse wants you to go do something, you can see on the calendar for the year 2025 when your days off are. So that's attractive as well.
Next month, every overnight, with the exception of 2, are in Orlando. Every single one of them.
So you got to try to find new things to do in Orlando.
Yeah. Listen, I have been to every restaurant within walking distance of our hotel. And all I can do is pray for a new hotel so I can get a new restaurant. That's it. There's no way, but that's it. Like that's the card I chose. Right. And 135 or 121, I have found that when you get into that zone of what fits you, that it's just so easy to enjoy the day to day and the thing that is like affects you the best. And that's how I feel day in and day out. So I love that.
I feel we need both. We need 135 pilots and we need 121 pilots. So when we have 121 pilots that tell us that they plan to go to, or 130, they're working for us and they plan to go to 121, we help them. We don't mind. We've had many times where pilots say, "Hey, I've been accepted by whoever, and I don't know my class date yet." And it's like, great, just keep us posted. It's fine. We know that is the trajectory for a lot of individuals, especially if they're looking at their retirement and, the benefits that come from 121. And it's absolutely fine. I think it's a neat world that we have pilots that like both. So there's the pilots that stay with us and the 135 is their life. And then there's the pilots that move on. And then I also do capture a lot of pilots what's at 65. Who retire and still want to keep flying. I've had many pilots say, "I just don't want to stop flying." So we have hired some of those over the years as well.
Here's a question, honest question. Are there any obstacles or difficulties to get a person, I'm not talking age, anything like that, but getting a person that's been flying Part 121 for 30, maybe 40 years and bringing them into a 135 world where customer service is exponentially more important, and doing flight planning and doing this and doing that, that to me seems like a really big change in lifestyle. What have you seen?
It is. I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, most 121 pilots that were trying to get into 135 just to keep flying didn't really understand throwing bags. And if the catering is messed up, you got to make phone calls and get the catering right. And like you said, flight plans and all of that. I find more now that 121 pilots who come our direction when it's time for them to retire, somebody's coaching them because they come saying, "I understand what I would need to do." And so we typically don't have an issue getting them to acclimate. It's actually, quite honestly, it's very similar to sometimes military pilots as well. When they're transitioning, they haven't done, they may have done the flight planning and things like that, but the different level of customer service where you're standing at the plane and making sure that all the bags are where they're supposed to be and that the plane looks wonderful and the Dom Perignon is in the cooler and, all of those things that a 135 pilot does. They tend to acclimate pretty quick. We definitely pair them with seasoned pilots that train them well.
But they're still going to the exchange to try to get a haircut, so we got to talk to them.
Yes.
Well,
but I find that after if they've done their SkillBridge somewhere else and then they come to me, they've got the haircut down. So
that's right. You let it grow out a little bit. That mustache is still a little weird. We're with you.
Yes.
Let's talk about SkillBridge. I love that you brought that up. Talk to me about your experience with SkillBridge.
I will say that at the beginning it was daunting because their application process is not the easiest to maneuver. However, they do a great call. They think they do it once a month or once every other month. They do a call where you can listen in and they talk you through how to fill out the application properly and succeed. Because if you don't fill out the application properly, you just don't get the appointment. So I did listen in on that twice. I will admit, I listened twice and took notes, and I did my application. And past the application point, working with SkillBridge has been very rewarding, I do have to say. I do talk to anyone and everyone who applies for our SkillBridge program, even if they don't qualify, just to give them some ideas on where they may be able to apply to build their hours or, things of that nature. Do have quite a few discussions with pilots who are curious about using a GI Bill maybe to pay for their type rating. That is an option. So I've had met quite a few people that I've really enjoyed, honored to get to know and try to assist. We do have SkillBridge participants starting with us. We've had 3 this past year. And then I've got 2 a month starting between January and May. I've got 2 each month, January through May. And they're also eager. They're so excited to be part of the team. It's just, it's really fun to be able to give them a window into the 135 world. And some of them have expressed that they'd like to go to 121, and we're completely supportive of that, whatever we can do to help with their transition.
Yeah, listen, there is nothing more exciting than knowing that you have a job after you've been doing something just the same for so long, and the opportunity that's out there, there's nothing more exciting. We
also are considering adding on a SkillBridge option for flight ops. For flight ops coordinators. And then that way, that's a good window into, especially for a low time pilot, a flight ops position is a very good position. You understand the regs, you understand what's required, you understand weather and, all of those things in flight, in assisting with the flight planning. So we've thought about doing that as well. I plan to try to implement that in 2025.
Do you guys use contract maintenance, or do you have your own maintenance departments?
We do use contract maintenance. We actually have a floating fleet. And so it is not really possible to have your own repair station with a floating fleet. We just never know where the planes are going to be. So we do outsource that. Obviously, we do have our DOM, of course, and some maintenance personnel on hand in the Raleigh area.
Okay, cool. I'm thinking about SkillBridgers, A&Ps, and things like that as well. So, okay, let's jump back to resumes, because before the show, I went back and I read a bunch of your posts that are so good on LinkedIn. So if you're not already following Ralyn on LinkedIn, you need to. You can find her just through my page. It's totally awesome. One of the tips you brought up the other day was talking about the aircraft that you flew and when you flew it, and how to list that out. Because what I see is, when I look at a resume, I usually see like total time, multi-engine time, and sometimes it'll break it out. If it's a military person, it might say like fighter time or heavy time or something like that. Or it might have 3 or 4 different types of Cessnas, and all of a sudden there's too much stuff. How do you recommend somebody detail, hey, I flew this at this job, and I fly this at this job, and this is where I got this experience?
I would primarily focus on the plane types that require a type rating. So, the Cessnas and all that you may fly during flight instructing, that's not really applicable. The type rating is what's important. So if a pilot has a CE 500 type rating, to fly those series, or a 560 XL type rating to fly an XL in those series, I need to know when they flew that. So if they flew that 3 jobs back, which was 5 years ago, they're not current to receive a recurrent. They'd have to take another initial. And so that's obviously almost double the cost. And so I have to factor that in when trying to make a hiring decision. Also, initial type ratings are super hard to get these days for 135. I am probably, if I needed a Citation 10 initial right now, I probably couldn't get one till August or September, but I can get a recurrent class fairly quickly. So a lot of pilots don't understand. It's not that we're not necessarily giving out initials. We just don't, the lead time is so long. So I need to know on your resume where you've flown that plane just to see how current or how recent it was. But again, if you flew a PC-12, it's not a, I don't really need to know about that for a jet operation.
I would like to fly a PC-12.
Me too.
That sounds fun.
My husband would like one of those. Yes.
Yeah, let's buy one. That's super smart.
Don't talk to him. You'll talk him into it.
Listen, it's a great idea. Let's go. Let's talk about the style choice for a resume. You look at a lot of resumes. I also look at a lot of resumes. Here's my trend that I have seen. Basically, a resume built into two columns, about a quarter of the page and then 3/4 of the page. And on the left little quarter of the page, it's usually like different colors, different hues. It's got like 16 fonts, and it has like a name, and it has maybe like a quote of some craziness, and maybe there's a picture, and maybe my military boys and girls, like they like to do their whole little rack of ribbons down there, or my civilians, like those inspirational quotes from my civilians, like that to me. And then on the right side is kind of a list of where I've worked. And that seems to be the new version of a resume these days. You like it? You don't like it? What say you?
No, not at all. When I ask pilots, why did you choose this format? Did you have somebody write this for you? Where did you get this idea? Which I do. When I'm speaking in a Bel Air voice, I do not usually critique resumes, but when I talk to pilots separately, I do. And typically I'm told that they were told to create their resume like that to stand out. And that actually is standing out in a not great way. It's more of a negative way. So your eyes have to shift to adjust. And so it takes just maybe a split second, but your eyes are adjusting. And to me, it creates an adverse reaction that's almost, you have to really, really think about it to what it does to your, as you're trying to review. And then all of a sudden you hit colors or columns or borders, borders all the way around the page. Or and definitely pictures are not usually advised anywhere in the United States. They create biases. They can create biases, and they should be left off in the United States for sure. So I do get a lot of foreign resumes. They do typically have their picture on there, and that is in Europe. And there's quite a few countries that is acceptable and actually expected, but not in the U.S.
Would you consider any thought to? I heard this yesterday. Somebody said you should leave the date that you graduated from college off of your resume. That way they don't assume that you are either super young or super old or whatever. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, in 135, we don't care about college education anyways. It's not factored in. So I don't read that section, quite honestly. So I prefer to be, if you really want to include your education on there, to me, for pilots, it's only applicable if it's aviation related education that I do take into consideration. But if it's, you got an IT degree back in 2005, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But yes, leaving the date off is fine. But the other thing is to leave off high school. So 20 years ago, people did put the year they graduated. They put the high school they went to and graduating from high school. Leave off high school, period. Don't put it on. That does give someone an indication of age. So
that's a good point. That's a really good point. I actually still shout out to South Caldwell High School in Hudson, North Carolina. That's where I went. Okay, this is good. How about, do you need to have that you have a class 1 medical on there? Should you put that on there?
I do like to see that. It doesn't hurt. I sort of assume usually that when my eyes skim over that, I assume that it's there. Most pilots do actually put that on there. And I have had instances where I've gone through the process and it says in our application that class 1 is required. And then I've had someone through the process a little bit later in the process say, oh, well, mine's a second class. I'm a first officer. And it's like, but I specifically need first for everyone. So you've got to go get that fixed. So, so yeah, it is helpful that you've taken care of that step. Also putting on there that there's a U.S. passport. I actually attempted to hire a very seasoned pilot middle of last year who just hadn't renewed his passport in some time because he hadn't traveled outside of the country. He didn't happen to be ICAO. He could not pass ICAO, which is fine. But you still have to have a U.S. passport to be able to fly 135. So
for sure.
So that was a little bit of a moment, so I do kind of like to see those things on there to know that you've checked those boxes.
Okay. The hardest part of a resume is figuring out what in the world you want to put in the blurb, but below, hey, what your work experience is. What stands out and what should you definitely stay away from?
So in the blurb on your work experience, if you've been piloting, like if you've been a captain or a first officer, I don't really need any other information. I know what a pilot does and I know what a pilot has done. The only thing I like to see into there sometimes is if they've done something extra. So if they've been asked to be the director of safety, or they've helped with the pilot handbook rewrite, or any of those things that are in addition to the regular pilot duties. So when there's 6 bullets, and it all says all of the things you're supposed to do as a pilot anyways. I checked weather. Well, my husband checks weather before we fly. I mean, we know that you're going to do that. So those things. And I think because most advice is to include that section. Now, I'll tell you, the best resumes are my seasoned pilots who've got 2 or 3 decades of experience and can fit their whole resume on one page.
Without having eight font pit, 8 whatever.
Yes,
small
exactly.
tiny words. All
they put is date, rank, and where I worked. I mean, that's all they put. And it's all I need if that's all you've done is pilot. That's all I need.
Yeah, I tell people that if you're going to write work experience down there, it's so hard to drag out what you need, but I talk in this order: leadership, safety, CRM. If you can just do 3 things, that's it.
Yeah.
And that's what I say.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I think that's super cool. The being able to get there. One of the things I've noticed reviewing resumes on a large stage when I'm at a convention or something like that, glossy paper is the worst because it catches my eye and I have to move the paper around and it bothers me. And also I'm now in my 40s and my eyes are getting worse, and which is very, very discouraging. And I think about that now too. Like the people looking at your resume may or may not have great vision. And so the way you choose to display that, you need to take care to go to that denominator of person to be able to let them be able to read your resume as well.
Mm-hmm. It needs to be very basic. And like you said, font sizes, it's okay if your name is in a slightly larger font size. That's pretty typical to have your name kind of stand out on the paper. But the same font sizes, and it's okay if some headings are capitalized and bold, to have a little bit to draw your eyes to those sections, that's fine. But yeah, 16 different font sizes is hard to, for the reader to digest. It's hard. So a lot of times I think pilots are only looking at their resume and they think their resume looks cool, but they're not comparing it to how someone quickly reviewing it would look at it. And I've heard some critics say, well, you should be taking longer to look at resumes. Recruiters just don't. We just don't. We look for the information we're looking for, and then we choose to read further or we move on.
Yep, absolutely. Give me a story about a really good point, something cool you've seen on a resume where you're like, oh yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I feel like less words on a paper is better. And then if it's really what I like to see is the top section being the flight times, mm-hmm. and then certifications and ratings, is fine under that, and just very basic and then concise information below. I've seen a lot of, and I know this isn't what you asked, but I've seen a lot of resumes lately where people leave off the dates.
The dates when they worked somewhere?
Yes. Like 2 in the last week. Not even kidding. So where did that come from? Like you can't, you can't hide your experience somehow by leaving dates off.
In my mind, I would think that person was there for a very short time,
Yeah.
and there's some other thing that makes me think like maybe there's a problem here.
Yeah. To be helpful, I do reply to those and say we cannot review your resume without dates. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just sort of one of the basic things. But as far as things that stand out that just very short and concise, like I said, the seasoned captains who send me a resume that have date, name of the company, the position they held, the plane they flew with no other, obviously their flight times are in a column and their ratings and all of that, but less fluff. Those are just the easiest ones to review very quickly and say, this person qualifies or they don't. I mean, it's just that simple.
Yeah. I had a guy hand me a resume once, and he was the manager of a casino, which I thought, well, like, he was a pilot. He had a ton of hours, but at the very bottom, it was like manager of that casino. And like that grabbed me. I was like, well, we certainly have to talk about this. I think something like, if you've got something cool and spicy on there, like that's going to draw well, maybe, but definitely in the yes pile. Like I'm that kind of guy though.
I think I've had one or two where I've thought, wow, that was really neat. I do always like on my military resumes, I do talk to a lot of Army folks, and I love to see the Black Hawk on there. I did have a pilot flew for us for a while who was a Black Hawk pilot, and he had some pretty cool stories. And so I do always think that those would be fun to hear those stories. I also hired an Osprey pilot recently. Do you know how badly I want an Osprey now? I've tried to talk my husband into an Osprey, but apparently you can't buy them in the US. So there's that.
You can there's like a civilian version that's smaller, but I'm sure you could sort it out. You should certainly do that. Listen, the people that listen to this show fly the things that you want to hear stories about. So every single one of them right now is going to my LinkedIn like, all right, Ralyn Wheeler, let's see, where's she? That's welcome to my world.
And I think that that's also what makes my conversations with pilots a little bit interesting too, is that I do actually, as I had mentioned to you before, I do actually own an airplane. And so that does create a connection, and that creates the possibility for us to have an actual conversation instead of me running down a paper and saying, tell me about this, tell me about that. It opens up a conversation. If they know the type of plane that I have, if they're familiar with it. And then, it often opens up where a pilot will tell me, well, I own a Mooney. And I'm like, oh, don't tell my husband. He'd like that too. So it's also a really good thing to me. Low time pilots, if they're building time on their own aircraft, I want to know about that. And that's something people don't put on their resume. I mean, that's recency. You're in the air, you're flying, you're choosing where you want to go. I mean, that's interesting information. So I encourage pilots to put that in their professional summary. It's not a job, but that's how you're gaining time. It's awesome information.
That's really good. That's a great nugget. Anybody that listened to this whole thing is going to come up and be buying planes now too. But also, I do want to bring up the fact you just kind of glossed over the fact that you do own an aircraft. You speak aviation as if it's part of your soul. God bless my recruiters. I love all my recruiters at all my different places. There are many that are not aviation people, and they have a job, and their job is to recruit, and they can ask you the questions and do some things, but there's an ability to connect when aviation is part of your life and part of your soul that takes a lot of the stress off for the applicant. So thank you for doing that.
Well, let me tell you. So a lot of times when my husband and I are flying around, and we do land at more remote areas, but we have had times where we've landed and there has been an aircraft that we can see on ADSB that I know is a charter aircraft. I know it's dropping off somebody in Valentine, Nebraska to go golfing or something like that. And there's times I usually hit my husband and say, hurry up, land. I want to try to get those pilots before they take off in the courtesy car and go find food. Like, I want to talk to them. So you should see these pilots as I walk up to them and say, hey, who do you fly for? Hey, how do you like that plane? And they're looking at me like, why is this lady talking to me? What is she, And then I say, I happen to be a pilot recruiter, and the whole thing, the whole persona changes, and they're like, really? So I do carry around my business cards. And I actually did in Valentine, Nebraska. My husband and I landed there once, and I was going to go on a bicycle on a bike trail. And when we landed, we couldn't see where the courtesy cars were. We couldn't figure out where to go. A gentleman in a cargo plane landed kind of just a few moments after us, and he very friendly. And he walked over and he said, "Hey, can I help you?" He had an accent, thick accent. He said, "Hey, can I help you? What do you need? I could, where?" And I actually did hire him.
I love it.
He worked for us at Bel Air for about a year. But just being friendly and outgoing. And we actually are now friends with him and his father who flies backcountry like we do. And so you never know who you're going to meet in the middle of nowhere who might be able to give you a job. That's why I tell people all the time, network. When you're at an FBO, just meet people. Hey, where are you? My husband walks up to everybody who lands at the FBO and says, "Hey, where are you going? Where are you coming from? My wife's a recruiter. You want to talk to her?" And sometimes I go, "Honey, I'm not hiring right now. So yeah, you never know who you'll meet somewhere. And I have actually met a pilot really in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if you've ever been to Valentine, Nebraska, but there's nothing there.
I've been over Valentine, Nebraska. I'm certain of that. If it happens to be in the Midwest.
They do a really cool fly-in once a year where you fly your plane and you drop flower bombs on a target. We did not do that in our plane, but they do that. So yeah. So just in case you ever needed to go to a fly-in in Nebraska.
That's very like Snoopy Red Baron. Like, I like that.
I do have a pilot that I work with, a low-time pilot who's probably listening to this thinking, I know exactly what she's talking about. He's from Nebraska.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, Ralyn, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for talking to the pilot. And I would say, if people want to find you and have a conversation, maybe they're a low-time pilot and they're considering the 135 world and they just want to get a sanity check. How do they reach out? How do they find you?
The best way to try to contact me is through Messenger on LinkedIn. As I tell everybody, I sort of any conversations that I do on the side of my regular job, and so I am very limited in the amount of calls that I can take. But I do try to, especially if I see someone who's kind of close to meeting the minimums that we can take in the next, maybe year or two, do try to give them a little bit of guidance. So I do the best I can. It's like I said, it's kind of on the side, just trying to help the aviation community and helping. The reason I started doing the posts, really, quite honestly, is that I had so many pilots asking me questions, and I thought, why doesn't everyone know this? Let's just post it. Why not let everyone know? And so sometimes I do get pilots reach out to me and ask me questions that have been answered in some of my posts, and I do ask them to go back and read those posts, and if there's anything else that they're not aware of, then send me a message.
Well, we're about to quadruple the size of your LinkedIn community, so thank you for being part of the community. Thank you for all that you graciously offer and help, and just your giving spirit, and thank you for being part of the show today.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was fun.
All right, pilots, that's the episode. I hope you've really enjoyed it. But before you go, do me a quick favor, subscribe to my show and leave me a review. Give me a 1-star review if it was totally worthless. Give me a 5-star review if it was the most amazing thing you've ever heard. I want to hear from you. So if you can give me a review, subscribe to the podcast, make yourself a little bit better, I will be happy. You'll be happy. We'll keep crushing. I cannot wait to see you on the next episode.